very effective. We have a lot of expertise in the room and on the panel. My name is Jane Adams. I'm a reporter at EdSource, and I write about social and emotional learning. Before we get started with this incredible panel, and we're thrilled that Antwan Wilson is coming in, I'm going to ask everybody to stand, if you don't mind, and we're going to ask a question. The question is going to go up on the board, and the question is going to be, how important is it for California to incorporate social emotional learning into the school curriculum? And this is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10, and when you hear your number, sit down. Okay, so we're going to start with 1. 2, everyone's still standing, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, we have got some believers in the room. Very exciting. Okay, so I am going to briefly introduce our wonderful panelists, and then we're going to get going. Let's see here. So Jacquie Beaubien is a senior program manager at PERTS, an applied research center at Stanford. They are the growth mindset people. Michael Essien is the principal of Martin Luther King Jr. Academic Middle School in San Francisco. Rick Miller is executive director of the core districts. Ellen Moir is the founder and chief executive of the New Teacher Center. Antwan Wilson is superintendent of Oakland Unified School District. So I'm going to start with Michael. I know our panel is about social emotional learning and the whole child, but this is really about the whole adult. I'm going to ask you to talk about what you've seen at your school in terms of social emotional skill building for teachers and staff.
First of all, good afternoon. So when we look at social emotional learning, we define it a little different. Social emotional learning at our school site, social emotional learning, we are social beings, we're social animals. So how we relate in the building is our social emotional learning. It's not necessarily about a curriculum, but literally the relationship that exists between students and teachers in action. So one of the things that happens at Dr. Martin Luther King Middle School, we have a student population of 520 students. We have 88.1% free and reduced lunch. Of the 520 students, we had 1,963 referrals one year. We follow that up with 2,150 referrals. That is a significant amount of time of students being outside of the classroom. And so as assistant principal, when I was assistant principal, it was my job to figure out, well, what was going on with the relationship between students and teachers. What we found out is we had identified 212 students as tier 2 individuals, and for somebody who sat over student support, that is not sustainable. We cannot support children at a tier 2 level, 212 students, which is roughly 40% of the school site. But we did notice there were microaggressions by teachers across curriculum, across periods. And so we said, well, then how do we support teachers in understanding what was going on? So we took our teachers and we provided them with training around de-escalation language, volume, tone, word choice, proximity, and most importantly, learning what an escalation cycle looks like. When teachers were actually given that power, we then said we're going to now support teachers. With the way we're doing school now, we're transforming public education. There's so many things that are now placed on public school teachers. They are everything. They're big sister, big brother, social workers, psychologists. They do academics. After school, they provide nutrition. So we said we need to reduce what is happening so that teachers can remain focused on what they're paid to do, which is academics. So teachers were taught to identify an escalation cycle. And when they saw a student escalating, their job was literally to disengage from the student in the classroom, call for a push-in service, and then continue teaching. We would then send in our academic counselor, our head counselors, assistant principals, and principals into the classroom to support the student in being re-engaged in the lesson. We went from 2,150 referrals to less than 600 referrals last year. And the teachers felt that their job was actually easier to do. They no longer had to engage and try to problem solve in the middle of teaching a lesson. And students who were traumatized, and we had a significant number of kids who were traumatized, the classroom became a place that was more neutral because the teacher stopped engaging in language that would escalate them and change the environment of the classroom. So now students literally have learned that when they call for a push-in service, you know you're not leaving the classroom. So students themselves have begun to self-regulate and self-correct and remain in the class. So the reduction in our referrals ended up producing academic gains. And so we're one of those schools now that they like to talk about in terms of the academic gains, with the school that traditionally has not had those. So when we say social emotional learning, we're literally talking about how do we redefine the relationship that exists between students and staff, and looking at that in a new way so that kids who have been traditionally outside education can now be part of the learning process. Thank you.
So much, Michael. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn to Antwan now. As a superintendent of a district that has been very much out there in its commitment to social emotional learning, I'm wondering how you can back up that commitment with time, money, and people. Somebody's going to be upset about something in the budget, and how do you put enough money in to make this successful?
Well, fortunately for me, I don't have to worry about people being upset about the budget. I would say that in all seriousness, it starts with Oakland has had a commitment to really try to grow stronger in the area of SEL for several years. And so first of all, I just picked well. I mean, just picked a district that this was a focus, and it was something that I have an interest in terms of trying to grow stronger at. So that helped. I think first and foremost, what we had to do is we had to identify partnerships. And so there are partnerships in our district that have helped us get this going, which allowed the district to create some proof points that put me in a position where we could develop an academic social emotional learning division. So to start with, roughly about $600,000 in outside funding coming into the district to support our efforts around studying social emotional learning, partnering with other districts through the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning CASEL, partnering with other districts through CORE, and studying this work. That has allowed us to hire people who are central level in central level positions, as well as partner with school leaders that are interested in this area as well, to think about what this could look like on the ground level. So that's the first thing that is extremely important, is once you begin to have that investment, then it really created the space where this year we moved to have a deputy superintendent focused on academic social emotional learning. And so the whole division, our academic division, is transforming to a division focused on academic social emotional learning and marrying the two. And that is explicitly working on how to embed social emotional learning standards throughout our school and throughout our curriculum, and also so explicitly teaching it, but then also implicitly as we teach literacy, as we teach science. How do we begin to embed this? And I unfortunately I didn't get a chance to hear the last panel or earlier group, but I heard that there were some students who came and really emphasized the importance of relationships in the work. And I think that's appropriately the case. So we've created a division that says this is what we're going to do, but the ask came from the bottom up, and that's the thing. It wasn't something that I came in and said, this is what I want to do. The ask really came from the bottom up in schools saying that this is what they want to do. And then we are also asking a lot of questions, so inquiry, and that's through partnership with CORE. How would we want to measure this? How would we want to report out about it? How would we want to talk about it? And then really putting those educators who are at the forefront of this work in our district in a position to help us make those decisions, and then partnering with other districts to lift those decisions up. In Oakland, we have a school governance policy that really focuses on trying to push as many decisions close to the students as possible. And so that does create a lot of benefits, and it creates a lot of challenges. And the benefits are, I think, obvious in that the people closest to students are going to have the greatest relationships with students, and thereby, most times, are going to make the best decisions for those students. What we recognize, though, is sometimes those decisions aren't working and aren't producing the growth and outcomes we want to see, or they're not moving as assertively as we like to see in areas that would focus and uplift academic social-emotional learning. And in that case, we were in the process of working through a defined autonomy framework that really defines for leaders in schools when they get to make those decisions, and then when they lose the autonomy to make those decisions. And the social-emotional learning team has been working very diligently to outline both the standards, create tools and resources that schools can use, share positive examples, and then also identify curriculum that we want to leverage so that when we're working with a school and saying, you need to do X, the X that we're picking, we can have great confidence that it has proven to be successful in Oakland, and so that we can look at leaders and teachers with a straight face and say, there's good reason to believe that this will be successful at your school. And then lastly, what I would say is this: the effort to focus dollars specifically must be married with the effort to say this is just who we are going to be. And so last night with the school board, as we're preparing for budget prioritization, that was a big part of the conversation. And that is, we're not talking about doing 10 other things and SEL. What we're talking about is marrying our academic program with social-emotional learning, and that's what we do, which means that the curriculum that we buy, the training that we provide, the positions that we uplift, the stories that we tell need to marry the academic piece with the SEL piece. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you. So Rick, I'll turn to you as the Executive Director of the core districts. I'm sure everybody wants to hear about accountability and your measurements. I'd love to hear about that as well, but I thought I'd start by asking if social-emotional learning, which I realize we haven't even defined yet, so if somebody wants to take a stab at that, but if that does get brought to scale in service of academics, what does that look like to you, and what do you need to back that up at the national level, state level, district level, school level, and what needs to be in place to support the vision of social-emotional learning?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think the reality is, in many ways, these are skill sets that educators have been paying attention to for years, have known about, but we haven't had a collective conversation about how to categorize them, how to look at them. So we at CORE took a lead from Oakland and from Sac City, who were part of the CASTLE work, and so there's a wheel of ways that they define social-emotional learning. Just for context, we look at 4 attributes as our focus: growth mindset, self-management, assessment, self-efficacy, and social awareness. So those are sort of the 4 things that we're paying particular attention to. And I think that from there, what we're finding is, as we've done a large-scale survey of students all across our districts, over 500,000 students are participating to better understand how these skill sets relate to academic achievement. And the good thing is you see a clear correlation, but it's not one-to-one, which is to say that we do know that if you raise these skill sets, you will get academic benefits, but they're not exactly the same thing. So you can't just simply go focus on math and get SEL skills up. You have to actually think of them separately, but critically, as Antwan talks about, embedding them into the work you do. And we're finding, so as we're getting information back, we're finding some interesting findings. So one thing we found is we looked at the SEL skills compared to academic outcomes, specifically in math in this instance. And what we found was you had the difference between high-performing kids and low-performing. So generally speaking, the higher performing you are academically, the higher performing you are in SEL. Not surprising, but it's not always the case. But so you see this line of a gap between high-performing kids academically and high-performing in SEL. And it's sort of a gap that sort of starts, it widens through the years, and then when we get to 11th grade, it sort of snaps, almost shut. And we thought, it's really weird. Why would that be that you'd come closer together? Was we unpacked the data and we learned what we found was kids who are low performing academically and low performing in SEL were gone. But kids who are low performing academically but high performing SEL we're still in class, still there, still trying to get forward. And so it's a strong argument to us, and you see this really widen in the middle school and then come together. If we can focus on these skills in service of academic outcomes, in service of keeping kids in class, that could be a game changer in sort of how we think about where we're going to put our emphasis as part of the school day, as part of the school curriculum. So for me, that's where I see down the road, giving teachers, giving educators more tools to think about these skills in particular and how you're going to put them into a math lesson. I think, again, Antwan's right. One thing I always say, what we don't want is close your math book, open up your growth mindset book, now we're going to do growth mindset, right? So it's really but giving in the context of a day, how in the middle of a lesson, an educator can take what we know about brain science, take what we know about skill sets of social awareness and self-management, and use that to further the classroom as they continue in their daily instruction. I think that is what we're moving towards and we hope to accomplish.
Thank you. So Ellen, I'm going to turn to you. Similarly, as Michael was talking about social emotional learning with the adults at the school, I know your new teacher center has done a lot of work on making teachers effective, but when it comes to surveys on how teachers feel about their jobs, a lot of dissatisfaction will come up with their work environment, having to do often with their relationship with their principal. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I just want to say that adult learning, adult social emotional capabilities in American education is the single most important area we can be working on together. You know, during the No Child Left Behind time, it was hard to say relationships, relationships, relationships. All we cared about were measuring kids on a standardized test scores. Today, it's a new day. And I think the kind of research that people like Richard Ingersoll has done, you know, when you look at the teachers that are staying versus those that leave are not leaving because of pay, although I think the teacher salaries could increase, but they're leaving because of the teaching and learning conditions in schools, right? Toxic communities, communities where they don't feel supported, communities where they don't feel like their voice matters. So I think that we have a situation today where we have a teacher shortage in this state. The most important thing we can do is to help our school principals, much like Michael is talking about and Antwan about, trying to really build adult learning communities where, just like we heard from Reginald, we heard from the other students, relationships matter. Teachers are hungry for relationships too. So are principals, and so are the district leaders. So I think that, you know, as we just heard, we don't want social emotional learning in a box, a kit, a 1 hour. You know, as Rick said, we want it to be integrated into the whole of what we do. And, you know, I was meeting with a group of mentors yesterday, and they said to me, you know, we're mentoring all these new teachers and we're really worried. We want to do it well. how do you do it well? And okay, here goes. I said the single most important thing you can do is care about your new teachers. And then bring rigor and pedagogy and content and structure to those conversations. Like, as we think about trying to not only recruit teachers, but to keep teachers inspired, I'm thinking about what Diane was saying. Imagine a world where we went to school every day and teachers were inspired and loved their students and could hardly wait to teach. That's what we have to create together. It's about people. This social emotional learning is about us. It's about how we show up every day. It's about how we care about each other. It's about equity. It's about valuing people. And kids need this. We need a through line that you can touch, that's the pulse of a district, that starts with the superintendent and continues all the way to regionals of the school districts. That's what we can create together. And actually, you don't need a college degree or any darn degree to figure out how to care about each other.
Thank you, Ellen. So we're turning now to Jacquie, and I'm hoping that you could help people understand what a growth mindset is, if people are not up to speed on that, and talk about it in the context of kids who perhaps have undergone trauma and have their own struggles as they show up. I think there's been some concern from Carol Dweck that people are not using growth mindset in the appropriate way. They're not understanding the concepts. If you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as you said, really, really an honor to be here and very inspired by all of the speakers today. I think, first of all, just to define what is growth mindset, what is fixed mindset. Growth mindset is the belief that abilities are malleable, and a lot of the research has focused on the belief about intelligence being malleable, but it's actually applicable to a lot more than just intelligence. So believing that intelligence is malleable leads people to respond very differently to experiences, to the common experiences in the learning environments, being evaluated. So if you're believing that intelligence is malleable, you're not so afraid of being evaluated, you're not so afraid of the poor grade you might get on a quiz, because you see it as an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to learn from your mistakes and to be challenged and to push harder to do better next time. Fixed mindset is the belief that abilities are something you're born with or not, so you're born with a certain amount of intelligence and there's not much you can do to change that. And it causes students to react very differently to those common learning experiences. So they're a lot less comfortable sharing when they don't know something because they see that as evidence that they don't have that innate ability. They're a lot less likely to see effort and trying hard as something that's helpful. They see it as actually evidence that you don't have that innate ability, so they don't want to show that they're having to work hard at something. So there's a lot more to it than just this idea of effort, and that piece about effort is where a lot of the attention on growth mindset has focused, is that you really want to get kids to just try harder, but it's not really that helpful to keep trying hard doing the same thing that is not working in the first place. So it's really much more about getting kids to engage in the reflective process about what are they learning from their mistakes, what strategies are working and what aren't, being willing to seek out support and help. And so that is the concern that you mentioned Carol has been very concerned about, and we are as well at PERTS, is helping educators understand that it's much more than just telling your kids to try harder. And it's much like what you mentioned, Rick, and what you've all been reflecting, is that it's so much more than just something that you take out of a box and apply. We actually created, PERTS is really about translating research into practice and then learning about how teachers are engaging with those suggestions and figuring out what more we need to do to support them in learning about this. So we created what we call the Mindset Kit to share out resources on growth mindset, belonging, purpose will be coming at some point. And What we want is to be able to share those resources out so that educators can really engage deeply in seeing that it's much more than just that. But what we don't want is people, when we first released it, we actually had people say, can you send us that kit? And we really did, we were like, maybe that wasn't the best choice of name, but what we want is people to see that it is a lot more than just something that you do as an aside. It's something that it becomes embedded in your practice as a teacher. So where do mindsets come from? Obviously, they come from the environment. So it's really important what practices teachers are engaging in the classroom. And it's not about just teaching kids a growth mindset lesson on the neuroscience. That's important too. It's important to help them understand the mechanisms, but it's also really important that the teacher is reflecting on the kinds of feedback they're giving students. Are they helping them see that mistakes are really valuable? Are they making space in their curriculum, whatever the subject is, to openly reflect as a class, what are the strategies that are really effective for helping us learn this information? Are teachers really open to hearing from students, what am I doing that's really helpful to you, and what maybe could I do better? That's teachers engaging in modeling, having a growth mindset for their students. So I think that all of those things are really important.
Thank you.
Did I answer all of the questions?
We can get back to more. We're talking a lot about relationships, which are, of course, at the heart of social emotional skill building. And I want to go back to you, Michael, about your observation of microaggressions happening in the classroom. Can you tell us an example of that, or how you became aware of it, and how did you have what I would imagine would be difficult conversations with teachers?
So as a principal, it's really challenging because we have so many moving pieces that we have to deal with in any given day. And so how do you have a framework for looking at microaggressions? So there are three components, looking at systems, structures, and individuals. How is the system producing the microaggression, or is it the structure, or is it the individual? And then what are the supports that we have? How are we going to respond from a systems level, a structure level, or an individual level? And so I do have partners I work with around this, one being the district behavioral action team and partners in school innovation. But so when looking at these teachers and what was taking place, we noticed children had stories when they were kicked out of class. And these stories were heartbreaking. And these stories, teachers didn't have the information around the story. But we saw that there was a connection between the story that the kid had internally and the language that the teachers were using in the classroom. Case in point, students out of your seat, I need you to sit down. I'm not sitting down. Like, if you don't sit down, I'm sending you to see Mr. Essien. You can't send me, that's not fair. And next thing you know, the kid is in my office. And we're finding out a story, the kid hasn't eaten over the weekend. We're finding out stories that a mother's on trial for 15 years to life for attempted murder. This was a kid in the classroom, and the language that the teacher used escalated the situation. And so we said a couple of things. One, the teacher is actually stressed. We did not say that the teacher was a problem. We're saying that the teacher was stressed because we had a high number of kids in the building who were traumatized. So then how do we support the teacher in building their capacity to create as neutral an environment so the kids who are traumatized can learn, and let those who are significantly traumatized be self-selecting, and then we can actually produce the services for them. And so when we started training teachers, and teachers started responding to a kid being out of the seat, young man or young lady, could you return to your seat? And when the kid was like, no, teacher understanding like, wait, this could be something big, it can interrupt academic learning. They would disengage, call for a push-in service. We would send somebody in, and the teacher continues teaching. So what we found is teachers felt that their stress level went down because they did not have to have a restorative conversation in the middle of their math lesson and their science lesson. The student was never escalated to the point where we use the phrase where the rider is off the horse, with the horse being the emotion and the rider being your executive functions to guide it. We saw a reduction in that because the teachers changed the volume, the tone, the word choice, and the proximity when dealing with the student. And so I shared earlier, we had 212 students that were identified as Tier 2, needing Tier 2 services. After training teachers around de-escalation, We went to 32 kids being identified in the entire school. The environment of our school completely changed with just giving teachers the capacity to use different words and identify an escalation cycle. So for us, that is dealing with social emotional learning, giving teachers the capacity, because they are the ones that have to be on 100% of the time, because that's where I want all my students to be, in the classroom. And so that is what we do. I try to get out the way as an administrator to support my teachers.
One quick follow-up question there. So people get pushed in. Is the teacher actually on the phone calling the office? I'm just trying to picture this.
So what happens, there's the context. One, we identified that in our classrooms, teachers should not be lecturing, no sage on the stage, 60-40, 60% of the time, students should be talking, and 40% of the time, teachers should be talking. So if something is taking place, a teacher literally should not necessarily be holding direct instruction at the time, can actually go to the phone, call the office, push in room 112, hang up the phone, and keep teaching. That's all they have to say.
What happens in that push-in, which you say is 3 to 5 minutes, and the student is back in action?
So I arrive at the room. The teacher can identify, or I can walk into the room and identify the kid myself. I literally walk over to the kid, say, let's grab a seat. Where are we in the lesson? We re-engage in the lesson, and when I see that the student is now back part of the group discussion and or reading or doing whatever the task is, I will wait 2 to 3 minutes and I will quietly exit. By then, because of our time sequence, the student does not have time to re-escalate, because now the class will end by the time the student can have an opportunity to re-escalate.
Ellen, turning to you and teachers, what kind of training are they getting to be able to handle complicated interactions in the classrooms?
Right, well, I think that that's a big issue for us to be thinking about collectively. But I think that if we think about the social emotional learning as being soft skills, then we're going to focus most of our professional development on the academic side of the equation, Common Core. And I think, or California standards, right? I think it's really important that new teachers coming in learn quickly how to build an optimal learning environment, build trust, build a community of practice in their classroom, do the kind of things that Michael's talking about, know their students well. I think personalized learning, really knowing every student, what the conditions are that the student faces, so that the teacher can be better prepared to individualize as appropriate. I think also new teachers in particular, I think all teachers need feedback. So in the work that we do, and we've got a scale-up I3 grant, but prior to that we got a validation I3 grant. In that validation study, we saw in 2 big urban centers, districts, when new teachers get instructional support and emotional support on a weekly basis over the course of 2 years, their students actually are scoring 3 to 5 months more student learning on standardized test scores than new teachers who are getting whatever the sink or swim method is in a district. So we can up new teachers' games. We can help them become on the path to building the habits of mind that we're talking about from the get-go by partnering them with expert teachers, by empowering expert teachers to really deliver on what they know, honor and value them at the same time. We get a threefer, because students are the primary beneficiaries when our teachers are the best that they can be. New teachers are on a path to excellence, and experienced teachers get to thrive in ways that I think they're hungry for, that kind of social emotional learning. So really teaching all teachers about relationships, knowing their students, optimal learning environment, trust, how to de-escalate issues. These are all key pieces of what every teacher needs to know and be able to do. And I think that that should begin in pre-service. There needs to be that continuum. I mean, we're lucky to see social emotional learning today in standards, right, and in ESSA. I mean, we've got to really build that continuum from the very beginning. And I actually think it starts with who do we select to even be a teacher, right? I mean, let's look carefully and make sure we get teachers who have strong social emotional capabilities. Because it's really hard to teach. Even though I want to have a growth mindset, I definitely know that there are teachers that can form relationships with kids right away, and that just takes off. So I think let's start with the process for selection, for hiring teachers, and then how we develop them across their career. If teachers are sitting there thinking about, this too shall pass, we're in trouble. Instead, this is about them. This is about teachers being able to thrive and be their best.
Thanks. Antwan, I'd like to turn it back to you. Trauma is a huge issue, or hugely recognized issue, finally. What do you see happening with trauma in your students in your district and the effect of that trauma on your teachers and staff?
Yeah, thank you. So, we are in a city and in a region where the majority of our students have either directly experienced several forms of trauma, or they indirectly experienced it through a relative, friend, neighborhood. I was at a school just last week. Some of you may have read about all our students at Castlemont High School protesting. And the reason why I went out is I wanted to, anytime you see students so moved, I want to understand what's going on. And as much as nationally they were talking about what was happening nationally, in circle with these students, the students are talking about what's happening with them and their lives. I mean, this last weekend, I dealt with. This last weekend, my friend dealt with. And when you're talking to 40 plus students and they all raise their hand and share that they have been involved with some type of violence or some type of arrest, or have a relative or friend who has, that is very real. And so the impact on educators is they're carrying that too. And they are living in those communities, they're educating those students, and that is the constant reality because it manifests every day in the schools. And so our efforts as a district, and I always want to make sure people understand, the district doesn't get to start from a clean slate. Teachers don't, school leaders don't. They start from their current reality, and it's contextual. So I would just say for everyone who's here, it's contextual. What may be happening in one part of town or in a particular school may look different, and the work that needs to happen may be different than what is true in another school or different part of town. Same is true by city. So that's why I think when you were hearing the conversation with students talking about relationships, when you're talking about understanding, so much of our work at the district has been about providing tools and creating space for those conversations to happen. And so one of the things we've done as a district is begin to identify a common set of district values. And what we were asking is, what would it look like if Oakland Unified was a values-based organization where we come together around a common set of core values? And we went through a process here in this space at the beginning of August to select a common set of core values, and those students first, equity, excellence, integrity, cultural responsiveness, and joy. And now we're going through the process of saying, what would it look like if we were a district to align our actions to say that these values are important to us, and what would it look like and how would it be reflected? Where that comes up in trauma is this. If I'm a student and I believe that you care about the things that are going on in my life, and you position yourself to be someone that I can respect, that you are going to both challenge me and support me and seek to understand, not excuse, not patronize, but challenge and support, then I believe I can learn from you. And that's essentially what the students at Castlemont was saying. They were saying, we want to be a part of a school, a district, a city that demonstrates that type of care and respect and understanding.
I think we're out of time. We'll close on that note. If you could give it up here for this wonderful panel. Thanks so much. And Don't go anywhere. We're coming up with another panel. Louis and Linda Darling-Hammond are going to be talking about smarter balanced assessments. Thank you.